It's time for another amazing chemistry video with Mr. Stapleton, proudly sponsored by Farmers Union Nice Coffee.
Hi guys, this is just going to be a short video today. It's going to just be focusing purely on functional groups and introducing you to the different functional groups that you need to know in Year 12 chemistry. Now you may be asking, what is a functional group? Well, it's a very good question. Well done. That's why you're doing Year 12 chemistry. A functional group is a reactive site in a molecule. Now, organic molecules, as we've talked about before, are primarily made up of carbon and hydrogen. They're quite unreactive. They're generally non-polar. All they really do is burn. Okay? So what you need to do in order to do a reaction with an organic molecule generally is to have a site in it that allows you to perform a reaction. And a functional group generally has electrons or bonds or something within there that allows you to actually react and form something new. So I'm going to introduce you to some of the different functional groups that we look at here in Year 12 chemistry. The simplest one, the first one that we normally look at, which is what you have the basic building blocks for organic chemistry, is an alkane. Okay? And an alkane functional group is simply a carbon to carbon single bond. Now remember, every carbon needs 4 bonds around it. Okay? So when we're talking about just a simple carbon-carbon bond, that's an alkane functional group. The next thing we can do is increase the number of electrons within a carbon to carbon bond, and what we get is an alkene. Okay? An alkene has a carbon-carbon double bond in there. Okay? Notice that we now change the arrangement around our carbon atoms to be trigonal planar rather than tetrahedral like we had up with an alkane. The naming of the functional groups is quite important because that also talks about how we name the molecule. Alkanes end in ANE and alkene ends in ENE. Okay? And we can actually adjust the name of a molecule based upon what the functional group actually is. At the end of this video, I'll put up a quick 2 slides which just show some of the different functional groups, some examples of them, and some names, all right, of how we name them, so you can see it in a bit more depth. If we continue on and add more electrons between the 2 carbons, we get to an alkyne functional group. An alkyne functional group is a carbon with a triple bond to another carbon. We've now gone from a tetrahedral arrangement to a trigonal planar arrangement to a linear arrangement around our carbon atoms. And this has quite an impact upon the bond angles within the organic molecule itself. But these electrons, extra electrons within the double and triple bond, allow us to be able to react there. The next most probably common functional group that we look at in organic chemistry is what we call the alcohols. Okay? Now the alcohol functional group is sometimes also called the hydroxyl functional group, and it's where you have an oxygen and then a hydrogen in there. So this electronegative oxygen allows hydrogen bonding to be formed between different alcohol functional groups due to the fact that you've got a large difference in electronegativity here. Okay? Alcohols end in OL. Okay? What we can do is also use the OH group and combine that with what we call a carbonyl group. So a carbonyl group is this one here. It's sometimes also called a ketone. Okay? A ketone is a carbon with a double bond oxygen on it. Okay? Now that's a polar group because you got a difference in electronegativity between the oxygen and the carbon, and so that creates a polar functional group there, which allows you to form some dipole-dipole bonds within the organic molecule, and you'll quite often see those in lots of organic molecules. And as I said, we can also combine these 2 functional groups to give us what's called a carboxyl functional group. A carboxyl functional group you'll sometimes also hear referred to as a carboxylic acid. And that's basically a carbonyl group, a carbon double bond oxygen with a hydroxy group on there as well. So we've made a new functional group called the carboxylic acid. And these are really good to have within organic molecules because what you can do is you can deprotonate this and put a sodium or a potassium ion on there, and that will allow you to form ion dipole interactions with the organic molecule and make it water soluble. Okay? A couple of others that we do as well are aldehydes. An aldehyde is a carbon double bond oxygen, but this time with just a hydrogen on it. Okay, so sometimes when you see this written, you might see this written as CHO. that's an aldehyde group. It's different from a hydroxy group. It's not an alcohol, it's an aldehyde. It's quite different. You don't get hydrogen bonding occurring with the aldehydes here because you don't have a hydrogen attached to electronegative oxygen. So there's no hydrogen bonding that occurs. Okay. The other one that we also will look at, and I'll put in here, is an amine group. Okay. An amine group is where you have a nitrogen atom in there. Now there's lots of different types of amines in there. You can have a primary amine where you've got 2 hydrogens on the nitrogen. You can have a secondary amine where you've got 1 hydrogen on the nitrogen, or you can have tertiary amine where you've got no hydrogens on there. Okay, we'll look at those a bit more depth when we look at amines a bit later on. Okay. They're the ones that we kind of look at and are required to be able to name in Year 12 Organic Chemistry. There are 2 other functional groups that we do look at, but you don't really need to be able to, or you'll be able to name the esters. With the amides you won't need to, but I'll just show you those functional groups as well. Okay, so if we're looking at an ester occurs when we combine a carboxylic acid and an alcohol together. And an ester functional group is now a carbon in the middle of the chain with a double bond oxygen, an oxygen on that, and then this is the rest of the chain. Okay, so either side here we've got carbon atoms, and this is our ester group in the middle. An amide group results from when we take a carboxylic acid and an amine, and so we get the carbon, the carbonyl group from the carboxylic acid, and we get an amine group joining in there, and we form an amide. Okay, and then we've got carbon atoms either side. You'll find these in proteins, which we'll look at later on in this topic as well. So this is just an introduction to the different functional groups that we'll use in Year 12 Organic Chemistry. I suggest you understand and be able to know what the functional groups are, because when you come to naming the molecules, it's really important if you can identify them really quickly. Alright, as I said, I'm going to put up a couple of slides now just showing these functional groups again with some examples and some names. I encourage you to have a look at them. I'm not going to put them up for a long time because you can always just pause the video, have a look at them, and then use something like screen capture or snippet tool or something like that to save them as images if you want. Have a look at some of the examples, how you name them, and as always, if you've got any questions, anything you're unsure about, please just leave a comment below. Thanks guys.